I would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Hello and welcome to the Cultworthy Cinema Podcast. I'm your host, Antonio. This is a very special episode because I'm doing something that I haven't done for a while, and that is doing a full-on film review. I was given an amazing opportunity by Shout Factory to preview and screen their upcoming 4K release of Alan Rudolph's 1999 film Breakfast of Champions, starring Bruce Willis, Nick Nolte, Barbara Hershey, and Albert Finney. Now, the film was a notorious box office bomb. It didn't even really play in most theaters. It was critically lauded at most of the film festivals that it played in, and it kind of disappeared into obscurity. One of the reasons for that is, one, it was probably just the wrong time. People didn't want to see Bruce Willis in an art house film that was low budget. He was still very much in his action drama period of his career. But not only that, just like so many famous novels of its day, it was called unfilmable. And a lot of critics and literary scholars said that it did not capture the energy of the book and just didn't hold up to it. But how does it play now, 25 years later? So that is what we're going to discuss today, as well as having a very special guest. I was given the opportunity to interview Alan Rudolph, the filmmaker of Breakfast of Champions and many other great films. Great writer. He started his career with Robert Altman, and we get into that a little bit. But first of all, let's talk about Breakfast of Champions. It's visually striking, and it's thematically complex. It's the adaptation of Kurt Vonnegut's 1973 novel of the same name, and the film presents Vonnegut's darkly satirical narrative, blending absurdity with existential musings about the nature of free will, identity, and the obsession with American success. The film centers on two primary characters: Dwayne Hoover, a wealthy car dealership owner who slowly descends into madness, and Kilgore Trout, an obscure science fiction writer whose works are pivotal in Hoover's breakdown. The story unfolds in a chaotic, surreal landscape where the boundaries between reality and fiction blur. Hoover, after reading one of Trout's novels, comes to believe that everyone around him is a mere puppet controlled by his thoughts, prompting a violent rampage. Now, Rudolph's adaptation retains the novel's satirical stylings, and he adds his own artistic flourishes, emphasizing that the absurdity of modern American life is something that we will always live with. The director employs a unique visual style, utilizing whimsical, exaggerated imagery, much like Terry Gilliam does in his films, and a fragmented narrative structure. Now, the film also plays with the concept of authorship and control, with Vonnegut himself appearing in a meta-narrative role as a character who writes the events of the film. Now, we talk about meta all the time. This is a perfect example of it before it even became a thing. And that's what makes it so unfilmable in most people's eyes. Now, although Breakfast of Champions received mixed reviews, with some critics finding it overly eccentric and difficult to follow, others appreciate the way it captures the essence of Vonnegut's critique of consumerism, war, the loss of individuality in a corporate-driven society. But the film retains a bold experiment in translating Vonnegut's unconventional prose into the medium of cinema, offering a challenging, yet in my opinion, satisfying adaptation of a classic novel. Now that's my take on Breakfast of Champions, but how about we hear from the man himself, the writer of the screenplay, who wrote the screenplay 50 years ago for Robert Altman, and eventually got the opportunity to direct it with such a great cast. And I can't wait for you folks to see this, because I really want to see how it holds up 25 years later for you, because I definitely have opinions of how it held up for me, and we'll get to that after the interview. So without further ado, I give you Alan Rudolph. Hello, everyone. I have the just extreme honor and pleasure today to talk to one of my favorite cinematic heroes, and I'd like to thank the organizers for putting this wonderful opportunity together, and to the man himself, Alan Rudolph. welcome to the show. This is the Cultworthy. I am so happy to meet you.
Wow, my pleasure. Altman had a good quote about a cult. You know what a cult is? Not enough for a minority.
I love that. So we are here today to talk about the 4K release of Breakfast of Champions. I got to watch the screener. It's such a great film for me because I saw it when I was 18 years old when it came out in 1999. And I have to say that my brain did not understand or comprehend, first of all, Vonnegut, but second of all, what the film was. And now rewatching it with a lot more knowledge, insight, not only to your films, but also to more literary influences, I have to say that it's one of those things that you have to really absorb to comprehend. And I feel that is the problem with the generation below me is everything is so quick and superficial. We judge things by the surface that we don't take the time to absorb things anymore. And I feel that this is the film and your work that's a perfect representation of that. You need to immerse yourself in it. That's how I feel. What do you think about my take on my generation of that particular style of filmmaking and those kind of novels and literatures?
Well, they ain't going away.
I hope not.
Yeah, this is actually my 50th year of being involved with this project. I've written the screenplay originally for Altman, who was going to do it, and got sidetracked and didn't. Then I started making my own films. And when I made a little money that one year, I optioned the rights to the book I think I had it for a couple of years, but not consecutively. It was very expensive. And didn't get it made. And then we finally did get it made in 98, I believe it was. And now it's kind of what you just articulated. It's reaching an audience that I don't know if they'll like it or approve it or experience it, as you say, but at least they're armed and ready now where they weren't before. I kind of thought everybody knew the myth of the American success syndrome, but in true American fashion, they avoided that and rather stuck with the surface of it. And now this film may look like a calm, fuzzy documentary compared to the local news, you know. And even though we got blasted the first time around by all the critics, both barrels point blank. I mean, there were no prisoners. This time, I don't know if anybody will ever even review it, but I think they may understand what we're driving at. It's complicated because it's really funny. It's a hilarious film. And the issues are deeply serious, and it's hilarious and serious simultaneously. And I'm just happy that we've made a new 4K that a company called Films We Like, Ron Mann from Canada, is distributing it, and the Shout Factory is going to release the 4K after the first of the year, and I believe streaming it. It's never been streamed as far as I know.
Yeah, it's a hard one to find. Like I said, I only knew it from the VHS days.
Well, I got my only copy of it. Hopefully I can get a new one when they come. But I got my only copy of it at a warehouse store the day they were going out of business in the 99-cent bin. In fact, I found about 6 of my movies there. I didn't have copies of any of them.
That's crazy to me. Well, you bring up an interesting point about like how long the gestation period was of this film. And we've heard that story before with other, I'm going to say, novelization adaptations of things. There's something about the idea where a story or a novel can be deemed by, I want to say, the studios. I think the court of public and cinematic appreciators' opinion is different, calling a project unfilmable. We've all heard about these books, these stories, these adaptations that will never get made. And some do get made. Some are really great. And some, I'm not going to say are unfilmable because they were filmed, but they're just received differently. I'd say anytime you're dealing with Vonnegut, you do have to face the fact that there are going to be critics out there who will say that it is unfilmable. You cannot capture the energy or the magic that was on the page and make it cinematic. What's your opinion on that? And how did you approach this adaptation when that kind of ideas are out there in the zeitgeist?
You speak the truth, my friend. Actually, a side note, and that you're a journalist, you might be able to do this. I've been told over the years, since the book was first published in the early 70s, that countless directors and writers and producers have optioned it, some with rather prominent track records. It'd be interesting to know who took a crack at it. I was just a young, long-haired kid. I had hair then. Right after Nashville, we'd finished, and somebody brought the book to Altman and said it was unfilmable, even then. And he had writers trying to crack it. Nobody seemed to be able to. And I was about to write something for him, Buffalo Bill and the Indians, which was also an unfilmable stage play. I guess that's my little corner of activities, unfilmable things. Anyway, he said, I need a script. I can't move forward or even try to move forward without a script, and no one seems to be able to deal with it. Can you? And I need one now. And his marching orders, I can hear him say it, just don't follow the book. And so if you've read the book, Vonnegut is, I think he even said it was a birthday present to himself. Vonnegut is not only the author and the narrator at times, his alter ego is in the book, his alias is in the book. And he, instead of sometimes articulating or writing further, he'll come up with one of his original drawings to make the point or to summarize. And I don't remember the conversation with Bob so much, but I remember thinking, I don't want to make a biography of Vonnegut. It would be unfair to everybody. So I'm just going to follow the characters and try and reduce it to the story. And fill it in as I see it. But the main thing of that book for me personally was it was a reflection of the times and humanity in general, society, humanity, politics, madness, chaos, absurdity, and sentimentality in a certain way. And when we finally made it in the 90s, I wanted to update that to the same thrust, but 25 years later. I met Vonnegut the first pass in the early 70s in New York, and he said, a novel and a film should be separate identities. They should exist independently of each other, even if it's the same source. And they actually should never be similar. They should be starting points. So I had these two cultural icons telling me, some knuckleheaded kid, don't follow the book. So then when it came out, if you can call it that, it was like a piece of something that was radioactive, and everybody just walked around it and didn't even refer to it. And the people who took the biggest shots were the ones you mentioned, the type where they say, this is unfilmable and you didn't capture the book, which right. Each can be true, but not together. And what's curious to me, not just with this film, a lot of my films and others, here we are 50 years after the screenplay. I'd embellished a little along the way, but I didn't have time to take a step back and say, okay, let's start from scratch again. I actually didn't want to. Mm-hmm. But here we are, the world, this country, our population, chaos is what chaos, madness, absurdity are the dominant traits. Truth is whatever gets the most applause, and people have given themselves up to surrender to the madness. And the film hasn't changed one frame since we shot it. And if people have another thought about it, it always kind of is a curious factor to me. So what does that mean? If the work hasn't changed and suddenly it's prescient or predictive, shouldn't every review be, this is my opinion? Shouldn't it say that first?
Yeah, I like that because it does. That's the first kind of message I got from it, is the fact that, when the book was written and when this film was made, I still feel, and I was a younger guy back then, that the idea was we were all kind of walking around trying to project the idea that we were all sane and that we were all normal. Like normalcy was what everyone strived for. And the 80s and 90s idea of normalcy was, like you said, success driven and ego driven and clout driven. And then here we are, 25 years after the film came out, where I feel like normalcy is almost kind of a dirty word. Everyone wants to be individualistic, which I'm all for individualism. But also what that does mean is that what would have been considered insanity or madness back then is somewhat normalized. And then there's this weird kind of underlying idea that we want to return to normalcy. Like that's what I hear all the time, is like, when are we going to return to normalcy, to status quo? And if you go back and look at all the decades before me, I mean, I'm only 43, but I can go back and look at films from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Normalcy is different generation by generation. Yet as a species, we hold on to this idea that normalcy never changes. And I think that the way these characters are portrayed, and what an amazing cast. We'll get to that in a second. But I agree with you 100%, where madness is easier for the people in this movie. And that's the direction that they choose. And I think that was missed when it came out, maybe by critics and by, analysts of the film. But I think it comes out better now because there's so many of us that are just on the brink of, hey, when is the comet going to come? When are the aliens going to come? I'm tired of what we consider normal now. Madness seems easier. And I feel that this film reflects that. It reflects that in its cinematography, in its performance, and of course its score. Like the fact that it has that whimsical score throughout the entire movie, it enhances the idea that this is an experience and not necessarily a narrative film with a message. The experience is the message. Am I kind of like out of bounds making that claim?
Oh, well, if we're talking about a madness, there are no bounds. First of all, in my opinion, is what you call normalcy, standard, whatever it is, doesn't exist in each individual. I mean, it really doesn't. We are taught to conform so that society doesn't break apart. But I believe each of us is eccentric in our own way. And one of the points of this film is that it's like that Bob Dylan line, to be outside the law, you have to be honest. And I think one of the points of this film, when we made it, certainly when it was written, I mean, obviously there was no computer life.
Right.
Made it, there was the beginning of it, but there was no internet, no social media, which is the frame of reference for so many people now. Yet advertising, which is in the film, is the poison tip of the spear. Advertising to me has always been the enemy. That's the biggest. I mean, advertising in general might include television, movie, whatever it is, but that intentional action of taking the most fragile part of every human being, which is their identity, the thing that's under assault from birth, and one that's the hardest to maintain and hold on to or even define. And what advertising does, and now maybe the rest of the tech life does it exponentially, is it removes your personal identity that you don't even know how to articulate or define, and replaces it with an identity that just is easier and wants to buy this drink and feel young and wear these pants and look sexy until
Right.
you have no use anymore, and then you buy something else. But then, and we're all disposable for the advertising industry. And that's the way this movie, was my take on it. I can't say it was Vonnegut's take, but it was certainly the elements were in there to exploit. And I've had people tell me, this picture is over the top, in your face, that it's not serious. Well, first of all, you wouldn't get these actors to give those performances, comedic performances, if they were deadly serious about it. I mean, right. To an actor, there's no difference between a comedy or if this was a stark drama, it would have been the same for the act. They dive in, artists dive in. And I mean, Bruce and Nick and all of them, Albert, they're not hiding anything in their performances. They found their characters and went all the way with it. Madness, the way you mentioned it, I've never heard it that way, but I don't get out much. It sounds like a comfort zone. It's like if you can't deal with the pressures or the challenges or for you and society, well, let's craziness. I'll just be crazy then, and that's easier. Right. And then that's not crazy.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, because that's what I was saying is like madness is an easier choice for some because I think they've learned that it's okay because now the idea of the individualism as opposed to the conformity. And when you talk about identity, that's one of the questions I had for you because in all of your films that you've written and directed, I feel like identity is a very strong theme. One of my favorite examples I'm going to use is my personal favorite film of yours, which is Trouble in Mind. Keith Carradine's character of Coop has one of the most intriguing character arcs dealing with identity in any film I've seen. It's just a magnificent transformation. And I think when I see films, when we see a character arc that tries to change a character's beginning to end, but they don't really give it the respect of what's actually happening to that person, I feel that's a perfect example of that. What you kind of explained it, but how do you approach that when writing these characters of the fascination with identity, the change in identity, why they're changing, and is it a social impact? Is it a biological impact? Like, where does that drive for these character creations come from?
I guess I suffer from my own disease. I had a doctor once when I was a teenager tell me I had some problem and he couldn't figure out the source of it. And they finally said something that stuck with me my whole life. I even put it in a movie as a line. He says, well, I think you're allergic to yourself. And I can't explain it, I guess. It was always there, a starting point. It's funny, people, naturally, and to me, it's a compliment, to compare me to Altman because I started making legit films with him, and he's a master. And you and I wouldn't be sitting here, not personally for me, but he transformed how audiences watch films, how filmmakers make films, even if they never heard his name. They have, the baton gets passed. And I know everyone likes to think they reinvent when they do something, but it's like jazz, man. You have to, you're standing on someone else's shoulders. And Bob always had the biggest vision of subject matters. He would take on war. He would take on country music, and then work his way in. I don't know why. I mean, it's in my DNA. I start with details and try and work them out, and probably get a quarter of the way, and suddenly I don't want to go any further out. And people, I just feel that too many of us are not true to ourselves. It's such a hard thing to do. And we've all cheated, we all cheat in our own way. And when I say cheat, it's cheat your potential, your truth, and I get it. It's part of human nature, and there is no purity anywhere. And if you had the answers, then you got the wrong questions being asked. And all of that, I think the essence of all of it is we're connected. We're connected to something we don't know. And if we ever find out what it is, then it wasn't that important. But you'll have your whole life is bombarded by entities trying to tell you, I got the answer, I got the truth. Mm-hmm. And that to me was sort of the essence of breakfast. Now, I told Bruce, this is interesting, and I hadn't thought about it until I've been doing a few of these interviews. Bruce Willis is a very complicated guy. It hurts I haven't had any contact with him, but it hurts from afar. He and I politically are probably opposite ends, although we never discussed it, and I work with him twice. But in his heart and soul, he's an artist. He's a true artist. I almost have never worked with anybody on a movie set who knew more of what was going on than Bruce. He had great taste. He was funny. He was supportive. He's loyal. And he wanted this to be a comedy, and he wanted to really get into this guy. And I told him, I don't usually talk to actors this way, but we were talking before we start shooting. I said, to me, Dwayne Hoover, his character, the most famous man in Midland City, the car dealership, and his byline is, you can trust Dwayne Hoover. And people trust him because he tells you to trust them. And they just accept it. It's part of the advertising thrust again. But I said, to me, he's every politician who's ever run for any office in America. He's banking on his notoriety, his charm, his look, his whatever it is, his handshake. He hasn't spent doodly squat on his interior life. He hasn't analyzed it. He's just climbed the American success ladder easily, and it's working for him. Why should he question it? He can tell people what they want to hear. He can skirt the real truth of anything. And he's what we wind up with. And when he finally has something burning, questioning deep within him, it doesn't understand, like, who am I? What am I doing here? What's this all about? He doesn't know how to deal with it because he's had no self-enlightenment. He's had no self-exploration. So he does what most Americans do. I can't speak for the world, but it seems to be becoming, in the most ironic way, it's becoming one world. It seems like everyone wants an authority figure to tell them what to do and lead them over the cliff. So be it. But when he finally gets these questions emerging from his environment and his being, he has no answers. Yeah. So he looks like everyone else. Give me an answer. Someone come and give me an answer. And I laugh at it even now. The genius of this Vonnegut is the guy who gives him the answer. Everyone says only speaks nonsense, makes no sense. And his answer is, it's chaos out there, and you have free will, and you're a machine. And of course, our anti-hero, Dwayne Hoover, Bruce Willis, misinterprets that even, and it leads to no good. I think today, maybe not, people will see it. First of all, I think they're used to films that aren't told in the traditional way, and that the bombardment of images and sounds and everything is kind of commonplace now. I guess it wasn't then. I overestimated the acceptance factor then. I thought everybody would want to go all the way instead of be led. I thought they would. I thought you'd do this with movies. You surrender somewhat to movies, right, and accept what they're telling you. And all my films require that, basically.
They absolutely do.
And this one, I also thought Bruce really, he's the one who got it made. He said, I can get you a little money if we can make it, we'll make it our way. And we all wanted to make a comedy. I mean, he really wanted a comedy in his life. He said, I read the script, I read the book, I've optioned the book, I'll get you the money and no interference. We have to do it for a small price in this time frame. We were shooting a few months after he first called me about it. And it was like it never happened for the real world.
Right.
I mean, I went to Germany, it was in the Berlin Film Festival. And the distributor in Germany, Bruce showed up and Nick showed up, took me aside and just, if murder was legal, he would have committed it at the time. I mean, he says, how dare you make a movie with Bruce Willis and Nick Nolte, and this isn't a Bruce Willis movie. And all I said is, that's why they call them actors.
Yeah. Well, sir, our time is painfully short, and I have to wrap up the conversation. But
before we go, I want to say something because you brought it up just quickly about Keith Harington in Trouble in Mind. I love that film. Another sad part of my heart with Chris leaving the room the other week. But Keith's character in that movie, and thank you for pointing that out. He's a novel in that film, and the thing about Keith as an actor, he's not flamboyant in big ways, but he's pretty funny in this movie, and then can get serious in a heartfelt way, emotionally true. He behaves. He knows how to behave as a character. He finds that part of him that applies to a character, even if the character is not him. And then he goes into the moment and behaves. And I think that's what kind of hammered home that really great performance, is that whatever the circumstances, he did what a human would do, even if it's misguided. And I think the acting in Breakfast across the board, our first choice in actors, I never interview or rehearse, rehearse we do, but audition, I don't even know the words because I never do it. Just go after your first choice and see if they want to do it. And every single one of them wanted to do it.
Well, again, I appreciate you for your time and this opportunity. I love the film and I love your work, and my listeners and followers do too. So with that, we just give you all the gratitude in the world for everything that you've given us over the years. And I'm really excited to have a physical release of this in my hands. So thank you so much, Alan, for your time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, so what did I think about the film? So when I first saw this film back in 1999 on VHS, I just didn't get it. I wasn't mature enough mentally, intellectually. I hadn't read any Vonnegut except for Slaughterhouse-Five, so I didn't really know how to attack this film. Also, I was just like the mainstream in the sense that I was expecting some kind of quirky comedy that made more sense. If you're going to have Bruce Willis, Nick Nolte, Barbara Hershey, and Albert Finney in a film, then it should be like whimsical, chaotic, but also easy to follow, right? This film isn't that. So as a film, now that I've seen a lot more obscure cinema, now that I've seen a lot more artistic and auteuristic directors, I absolutely loved it. Now, I've also become a huge fan of Alan Rudolph, whose many films I hadn't seen when I was 18 years old when this thing came out. But now films like Remember My Name and Trouble in Mind and The Moderns, these are movies that I absolutely love, and I appreciate his different flair and eccentricity of how he makes his movies. But also, one of the things that I think I really recognize now in his films is his obsession with relationships, both romantic and platonic. Male, female, male, male, it doesn't really matter. He is obsessed with the way that people change for each other and the way that people kind of meld together or separate based on how the energy flows in their relationship. Now, even though this is an adaptation of a novel, he does a lot of that in this film. His relationship with Glenn Heady, his relationship with Barbara Hershey, his relationship with Nick Nolte. Our main character that Bruce Willis plays is so obsessed with the idea of success and the American expectation of success that, like I said in the interview, I feel that in his mind, madness is the easier choice. I love the absurdity of the film. I love the existentialism of the film. I love how it captures the chaotic spirit of Vonnegut's work, but is also capturing Rudolph's eye for the quirky and bizarre. I'm not going to say it's exactly like a Terry Gilliam film, but I feel like if you enjoy that kind of madcap energy, wide-angle lenses, an almost nonsensical imagery that Terry Gilliam puts in his movies, you're going to really like how this film plays. Now, the cast, Bruce Willis, I think gives one of his better performances in a comedic role because he does bring a lot of dramatic chops to it. He is absolutely unhinged by the end of this movie, but it also doesn't feel like it's overly forced or overplayed. This is a man devolving into madness, and we're letting the whimsical and madcap comedy of the film really emphasize that rather than him go full Jim Carrey, right? Now, Albert Finney, I think, is great at playing an eccentric character who's older, wiser, but also kind of lost in his own world of delusion. He's been writing these science fiction stories, which he's now kind of molded into his own psyche and created his own augmented reality and our reality, and that's how his role plays, and he does great with that. I think an underappreciated part of this movie is Nick Nolte. As the cross-dressing, I guess in our parlance, transgender person, is really fantastic because we really get to see more about what makes his character work, why the way he is, and how he is influenced by his person at home. That is a very interesting relationship in the movie, and the performance he brings, the madness, the energy, but also the anxiety and trauma really plays well. So at the end of the day, the cast, the story, and the filmmaking, I think, is an acquired taste. I think you really have to be in tune for that kind of movie. It's not a movie you can play on your phone while you're trying to watch, because you will miss important dialogue, you will miss important plot structure for whatever plot there is. It really is, as I've said on the show before on many films, an immersive experience. You have to be in the movie. It is not a narrative story, so you have to allow the filmmaker in the film to take you there emotionally and metaphysically. Now, the transfer. I really don't have a lot to say about it other than it's fantastic because the only frame of reference I have is the VHS from 1999, which was a 4:3 pan and scan. And, you know, it's kind of fun to think about when I would have seen that back in the day on a CRT TV with the wavelengths going through it, the pixelization of it. I really liked what it looked like then, but to see it now in all of its clarity, 4K gloriness with great sound, great image, great color, it totally feels like a different movie. And I think it's what added to the experience of how much I liked it better than I did back then. I don't have a full idea of what the physical release is going to look like, what special features. They did not give me that information. All I know is that it'll be coming out sometime earlier next year, and they put a lot of care into the transfer, and it shows. I watched it on a 4K projector, and it looked absolutely incredible, even coming off of a laptop. So that being said, I think that all the things that Alan said in the interview ring 100% true. I think that it just came out at the wrong time and that audiences now are more prepared for films like this. We're seeing more films from like Neon, A24, and Focus Films in theaters now that really live in this kind of whimsical and eccentric world, kinetic filmmaking. It really does speak better to this modern audience. Also, the ideas of the Vonnegut novel that make its way into it about the American success story, about the desire to conform, that kind of seems like a past thing now where everyone is so individualistic these days. I think we can look at this film now with a better mindset of how back then they thought that individualism and differentiation was madness, but now it feels like conformity is the madness. And again, that might not be Vonnegut's true message or Rudolph's, but that's the beauty of literature and that's the beauty of film, is that you can really take away from it what really reflects and resonates with you and have those fun discourses and debates with other people who have different opinions. So at the end of the day, I love this film. I gave it 4 stars on my Letterboxd review. I gave it 2.5, I think, from before, just going off the original recollection of what the movie was in 1999 for me, and it plays totally different. So it will hit streaming in 2025, and there will be a Shout Factory release coming very soon after. For me, as the cult-worthy, I say this is 100% a cult-worthy film. I think it's 100% worth your time, and especially with the appreciation that people are having for some of Bruce Willis's underrated and underseen performances, this is one for the books. We're all sad about what Bruce is going through right now. This is a great way to kind of cherish and champion the daringness he had as a performer in the late 90s and early 2000s. So with that, thank you for listening to my review. Please rate, review, like, subscribe to me on YouTube and on your favorite audio podcasting platform. And I'm going to do my best to try and get more conversations and reviews like this for this show. Please make sure that you follow me on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube, so I can give you updates of when this release is coming out. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And I'll see you next week.